After completing the Halo 4 campaign and collecting my thoughts on it, I was ready to move on. It wasn't the best Halo game ever made, but developer 343 did enough right that I was able to give it a pass despite some bumps in the road that I didn't particularly care for. Knowing that game sequels are often improvements over their predecessors, I eagerly booted up Halo 5 to continue the story. Almost immediately, though, there was a problem. As the game begins, we're introduced to tons of new characters that are obviously not the Master Chief. As the opening of the game continues, we're also reintroduced to Dr. Halsey, the creator of both the Spartan program and Cortana. She's apparently turned evil, lost an arm somehow, and is working with a Covenant terrorist. While I was very confused and taken aback by this, I figured it'd all be explained as the story continued on, so I kept playing. As the hours wore on though, nothing from the beginning of the game was explained, and it quickly became clear that I had missed something. And on top of that, Master Chief suddenly had a new crew of Spartans with him too. And did they get an explanation? Not really. Clearly, some investigation was required. After a quick jaunt through the Halo Wiki, and by quick I mean an at least 2-hour rabbit hole Wikipedia binge, I found my answer that yes, indeed, I had missed something. So when 343 picked up the reins of Halo from Bungie, one of their primary roles as caretakers of the universe was not just to make video games, but also expand out the world and lore of the series. I mentioned this a few times in my Halo 4 video in regards to some of the questionable retcons and additions they included in the story. Well, a part of that was also to expand Halo into other mediums as well. This wasn't necessarily something new to the franchise, as even during Bungie's tenure there had been book and comic tie-ins. However, Bungie's approach to many of these projects was much in the same way that George Lucas looked at the old Star Wars expanded universe. He let people play around and create some cool stuff, and he'd pick and choose the stuff he liked from those projects all the time to reinterpret as he saw fit. But as far as true canon went, the only stuff that really mattered was the stuff he worked on himself. So when George Lucas decides to undo years of world building and lore in the expanded universe for the Mandalorians in the second season of the Clone Wars, that's just how it is, they're pacifists now. Until they're not again, but anyway. So while Halo had plenty of novels, Bungie wasn't too worried about sticking to many of those, and they even directly contradicted one of them by reinterpreting what the Fall of Reach was like as opposed to how it appeared in the book, Fall of Reach. You can understand how that might make for some messy storytelling for those fans who played the games and read the novels. So early on, one of the hopes for 343 was that they would do a better job of aligning the various forms of media that the Halo story existed across. So all these years later looking back, have they succeeded? Well, it's complicated. Yes, it's true that 343 has generally done better at keeping a consistent canon together than Bungie did, but that comes with its own problems. Between the releases of Halo 4 and Halo 5, there were several projects that were released that helped bridge the story from one game into the next. On paper, this is a really good idea, as it gives fans something to keep tuning into and drives continued engagement with your brand. But that benefit can quickly become a hindrance if it's not handled properly, and what I've quickly realized is that the Halo franchise has not handled it well. Now, to be fair, they got off to a good start. Before the release of Halo 4, they released a web series known as Halo: Forward Unto Dawn. In it, we got to learn the backstory of Captain Lasky, who was once a cadet that Chief saved during the War of the Covenant. When watched all together, it runs about the length of a short movie, and while it was clearly made on the cheap, it's actually really impressive for what it is. It also wasn't required watching for you to play and understand Halo 4's story. If you did, great, you have a better understanding for who Lasky is as a character. If not, you're not missing anything major, and Halo 4's experience isn't worse for not having watched it. But almost immediately after that is where 343 makes their first mistake. Halo is typically known for two things: the campaign and multiplayer. Starting around ODST, the games began adding in an additional third mode known as Firefight. This was a horde mode where you and a team of friends would face off against waves of enemies to see how long you could survive the ever-increasing odds. The more you progress, the stronger the enemies become, and certain game modifiers are activated, such as enemies throwing grenades more often than they usually would. In Halo 4, the Firefight mode was instead replaced with something known as Spartan Ops. Instead of being a horde mode, Spartan Ops is a series of missions with many objectives similar in concept to the Spec Ops missions from Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and 3. Only in Spartan Ops, instead of there being random objectives to complete with a star completion rating, there was an actual narrative to follow along with. Set 6 months after the end of Halo 4, Spartan Ops features Captain Lasky and the crew of the Infinity returning to Requiem to investigate the continued Covenant presence on the planet following the defeat of the Didact. This group of Covenant is the same Splinter faction that Chief and the Infinity previously faced off against, and they're led by an elite named Jul Umdama. While the Didact may be out of the picture, this elite knows several things about the Forerunners that he thinks will lead him to glory, and so is searching for them on Requiem. Opposing them is the player's customized squad of Spartans known as Fireteam Crimson, which in the original release of Halo 4 was a cool way of canonizing your multiplayer Spartan into the world of Halo. You know all that cool customization you can do to your character? Well, now you can take it straight into the story and be your own little dollar store version of Master Chief. Spartan Ops is basically a playable TV show, as the whole thing was not available at the launch of Halo 4. In all, there are 10 playable Spartan Ops episodes, which include 5 missions each. Upon completing each mission, an extended cinematic would play, furthering along the story. In it, we get more interactions with Captain Lasky and Sarah Palmer, the commander of the Infinity Spartan contingent, along with new supporting characters. One of them is Roland, the Infinity's AI pilot, and part of the way through, Dr. Halsey is added to the cast. Now, I think the concept for all of this is great. A cooperative, story-driven experience to extend the story and flesh out our new side characters is a great way to keep story fans on the hook long after the official campaign had wrapped up. The intro cinematic also kicks things off with a bang. It gets you amped to start cracking alien skulls.
Ladies and other Spartans, listen up. Your new workplace is a planet first discovered by humanity 6 months ago, called Requiem. Some of the old hands here know what you're in for. The rest of you, you're due an education. The eggheads upstairs want to set up research bases. But before they can do that, we need to fend off some Covenant squatters. The Cubbies. They believe this is the home of one of their gods. The way I see it, if those freaks want to meet God, it's our duty to help them along.
But almost immediately, there's a problem. And that's the fact that Spartan Ops is split into 2 parts. Not officially, mind you, but if you've played it, I think it's pretty obvious. One half of Spartan Ops is good, the other is bad. I'll let you take a guess as to which one you play first. It's the bad half. Now, I'll acknowledge right off the bat that this is clearly meant to be a cooperative mode, and I played it solo, which means the level objectives and difficulty tuning were all designed to cater to a squad of 2 to 4 players. Instead, it was just little old me going in to capture footage, and yeah, it's pretty boring. Most of the levels are either amalgamations of different sections of the campaign, or just straight up multiplayer maps that the devs threw some enemy spawn points on. And for the first 5 episodes, they reuse the same couple of maps over and over and over and over and over again, with just slightly altered mission objectives. But they all pretty much boil down to kill a thing, destroy a thing, stay alive while the thing counts down, activate a thing, etc. That might be a little reductive, but that's pretty much what it is. Occasionally they'll spice it up and throw in a vehicle mission or 2, but that doesn't really help much because of the sheer number of bad guys that they throw your way. Pretty much without fail, all enemies must be eliminated before the mission will progress, which means if you play solo, you'll be fighting off hordes of Covenant or Promethean robots on your own without any backup for minutes on end. Now, thankfully, to mitigate the onslaught you're about to face, there aren't any checkpoints, and if you die, you'll just immediately be spawned back into the fray. Which is good because even on easy, these enemies are tuned to be harder than they would be on easy mode in the campaign. But if anything, that just threatens to increase the monotony of having to kill so many bad guys. I didn't think that shooting something in the face in a video game could become boring, but Spartan Ops managed to do it. Now, it also doesn't help that I work nights. So my workday ends at 8 a.m., and I come home and have something to eat and relax. For about a week and a half, that relaxing meant sitting down to play Spartan Ops for this video. Between a combination of my overnight work schedule, having recently eaten, and having to spend minutes on end doing nothing but shooting the same enemies over and over again, there were times I actually dozed off while playing the game, as you can probably see here. That's not stick drift, that's me slumping over my gaming chair asleep for the moment. While an explosion or something would wake me back up a moment or 2 later, I can't really say a video game has ever put me to sleep before now. But we do have to factor in extenuating circumstances. By the time I had reached the halfway point of Spartan Ops, though, I was really considering throwing in the towel and just watching all the cutscenes to understand the story. But I decided to push through, and I'm glad I did. The second half of Spartan Ops is much better than the first. For starters, there's lots of new levels that are clearly designed just for this mode instead of being imports from campaign or multiplayer. While there's 1 or 2 of those still, that's far more acceptable. Plus, the story gives you a much better narrative reason for going back to these locations a couple times than in the first half. In the first part of the story, you just keep going back to the same places and the script acts like it's a new location each time, when it's clearly not. Like, they don't even bother mirroring the layout or anything to make it slightly different, so it feels like you end up going back to the same overrun outpost like 4 or 5 times because for some dumb reason, the UNSC keeps pulling out the security detail and scientists are getting murdered or dying in unsupervised accidents by the dozens. While I'm sure the intent was probably to make each new episode have unique-ish locations based on the writing, that's clearly not how it worked out. Thankfully, by the second half, this problem is solved. One major location is on board the Infinity itself, as it's under attack from Covenant forces. You have to run all around the ship and stop bad guys from destroying things like the hangar bay, to the engines, to even the gunnery emplacements. This story decision really livens up the narrative and instills some urgency into it. The other locations you visit a few times also work better narratively, as one of them you're on a mission and have to return to the Infinity as it's under attack. So once the ship is secured, you have to return and retake all the ground you'd already fought for once, off screen though, thankfully. There's also better characters to interact with in the second half, and instead of just having Palmer give you your next mission objective and nothing else, Roland and another officer actually have a decent back and forth to listen to while you're blasting baddies. It's not on the level of Chief and Cortana by a long shot, but it's something at least. But what is Spartan Ops all about though? Well, as I mentioned, Jul 'Mdama's Covenant is searching for a mysterious artifact left behind on Requiem, and it follows the Spartans as they attempt to stop him from finding it. The first half of the story is slower, focusing more on a different squad of Spartans and setting them up for some character arcs that are very quickly shoved aside so the story can focus on more interesting things, like Dr. Halsey showing back up to look for a Forerunner artifact after one of the UNSC scientists is zapped into dust by it. Halsey's use in the story here is really interesting, as after the war with the original Covenant ended, she was arrested for crimes against humanity for creating the Spartan program in the first place. Which is understandable, I guess. She did canonically kidnap, experiment on, and kill children, all in the name of science. Not particularly happy with her current situation, she begrudgingly agrees to help, if only to satisfy her own curiosity on Forerunner technology. But before long, it's revealed that she has somehow been communicating with Jul 'Mdama, who is having his own problems understanding Forerunner tech. As it turns out, the UNSC scientist that was zapped into dust wasn't actually zapped into dust and was simply teleported elsewhere in Requiem, as in right in the middle of the Covenant base. So he's been forced to help them ever since, but he's not great at his job and so it's slow going. With her curiosity piqued, Halsey agrees to work with Mdama to figure out the Forerunner tech and defects, leading to the Covenant attack on the Infinity. After Halsey gets what Mdama wants, he programs the synthetic planet to fall into the nearby star, which will destroy the Infinity since the magical Forerunner box is also somehow keeping the ship anchored in orbit. So the last section or two of Spartan Ops has Fireteam Crimson figuring out how to shut down the fancy magnet as Commander Palmer is ordered by Oni to kill Halsey. A firefight ensues and Halsey is hit in the arm, and the Covenant are forced to amputate it since they probably don't have any medical supplies on board that would work on humans. So after Crimson manages to figure out how to turn off the magnet, the Infinity gets the heck out of Dodge as Requiem falls into the sun and is destroyed. Halsey, meanwhile, agrees to further help the Covenant so she can get revenge on the UNSC for imprisoning her after the war, despite everything she did for humanity to help it survive. And that pretty much wraps up Spartan Ops. I'll admit, while it was a slog to get through, I don't want to be overly harsh on it, since I wasn't really playing it the way it was intended. While the first half would probably still be pretty dull with the constant reuse of locations and uninspired objectives, playing with a squad of friends would probably make it way more tolerable. There's also some decent writing for the comms chatter that can be pretty meta at times, such as Palmer describing snipers as dirty campers or admonishing one of her underlings for being the stereotypical video game voice that announces whenever new enemies arrive on scene.
Crimson, keep an eye on those turrets.
Miller, we need to discuss your fascination with telling Crimson what's shooting at them all the time.
But even with some of those caveats in place, some of the big issues are still big issues no matter if you're playing solo or with a squad. For instance, those two halves are more than just separated by their level design. While the first half does build up the second half, it feels like you're almost playing an entirely different story because of the things that were added and dropped over time. For instance, there's a squad of Spartans known as Fireteam Majestic that are featured in many of the early cinematics. Their characterization showcases their faults clearly, setting them up for some ample room to grow by the end of Spartan Ops. However, the game doesn't really do anything with them. You hear them a few times over the comms as you're playing missions as Fireteam Crimson, but about 5 episodes into Spartan Ops, they are given minimal screen time as the story quickly decides to focus on more interesting characters like Halsey and Lasky. Spartan Thorn managed to be singled out and gets a decent amount of spotlight, but the rest of his squad isn't so lucky. By the end of the story, they've just sort of overcome all of their faults as a team off screen and learned their lesson, I guess. Which is a shame, as there's a really good setup here to explore in 343's era of Halo. Unlike the other Spartans we've all met before, all the Spartan 4s seem to have some sort of attitude issue. They seem very stuck up and full of themselves, often looking down at regular humans as inferior. Characters like Master Chief and Noble Team and Reach weren't portrayed like this at all, which leads me to believe this is a problem unique to the newer batch of Spartans, and almost all of them are like that. It's funny that Palmer chastises Fireteam Majestic for being so arrogant when she's just as guilty and acts the exact same way they are in other cutscenes.
Commander Palmer to Galileo Base. Dr. Owen? Doctor, your base defenses are offline. They are? Oh, son of a... Dr. Alexander was talking talking about using the power from the defenses to run a mini-reactor. I told him not to. Freaking eggheads.
Spartan Thorn seems to be the one character not like that, as we're clearly given his reasoning for wanting to become a Spartan. He wants to help people and stop bad things from happening, as he lost family in the Didax attack on Earth 6 months prior. While we don't really get backstories for the rest of the squad, you can imagine that maybe they signed up for the upgrades for less altruistic reasons. Going in depth and showing the growth these new Spartans could undergo would be a great way for 343 to differentiate themselves from Bungie's era while still keeping true to what came before and setting up good stories. But for whatever reason, the game instead focuses more on Dr. Halsey and the Forerunner mystery. And that's not to say it isn't done well. I actually like everything involving her. She's a really complex and interesting character. But it feels weird that the game sets up these obvious characters primed for growth and then casts them by the wayside in favor of your nameless multiplayer Spartans. If Majestic had been the main playable characters with voice chatter during gameplay, it could have built up their characters and helped fill the void at the same time. I almost wonder if that was the original intention and then something changed along the way. There's also 5 of them as opposed to the 4 that we usually see in Spartan fire teams. That gives room for Thorn to be an NPC since he ends up going on a side quest halfway through the story while keeping Majestic at a regular size to allow for a squad of 4 friends to, canonically, play through the story. But instead, they disappear for like 2 or 3 episodes in a row and then finally show back up to basically just fill out the background and cutscenes after Thorn is done with the side quest. But while I think that would have made the mode better, what they ended up doing was perfectly fine. As I said, I liked the focus on Halsey and it just gave Jen Taylor another excuse to give another really good performance. So that's pretty much Spartan Ops. While it helps explain Halsey's introduction to Halo 5 and what's going on with her, it still could have maybe been done better and not just from a presentation standpoint. Not everyone playing Halo 5 for the first time at launch would have played Spartan Ops, especially if they didn't want to go through all of it on their own like I did. So it raises the question as why you'd make something that wasn't the campaign required playing before playing the next one. But the required reading list for Halo 5 doesn't stop there. Let's discuss Blue Team. So Blue Team is Master Chief's original squad. They're the other Spartans who were kidnapped as kids and raised to be super soldiers alongside Chief. Together they spent years fighting against the Covenant as a unit, and them being introduced into the game now is kind of a big deal. They were all introduced in the novel Fall of Reach, the prequel story to Combat Evolved, which means despite not appearing in the games until 5, they've been a part of the lore for a long time. One way that 343 helped prep gamers who hadn't read the books was to adapt the novel Fall of Reach into an animated motion comic type movie. Or at least half of it, as the actual Fall of Reach isn't depicted in the film titled Fall of Reach. Instead, it focuses on the origin of the Spartan 2 program and the early exploits of Blue Team. For what it was, I liked it, and it made me interested in going back to read the original novel eventually. Now finally we get to this new squad of Spartans in Halo 5. Who the heck are they? That really begins with their leader, Spartan Locke. This is a character that was first introduced in the web series Halo Nightfall, where he's portrayed by Mike Coulter. I'm of 2 minds on this series. Like Forward Unto Dawn, it's made on the cheap, but does well within the limitations it has for the most part. The story isn't anything amazing, but does a decent enough job introducing us to the character of Locke. He's an operative for the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, and while they seem to be a little dubious in the Bungie era, the 343 era fully establishes them as the scary covert Black Ops group you'd expect them to be. But despite the organization being full of boogeymen, there are still some with good heart serving, and Locke is one of those. But while Nightfall does well to set up Locke's character, it doesn't really explain why he's here in 5 or why he's running with this particular squad of Spartans. So with all of that covered, I think we're finally set up for Halo 5, and boy am I exhausted. While I understand the intention, 343 quickly fell into the same trap that Marvel has found themselves in the last few years. You have to do too much homework in order to understand what's going on in the main story, and it's not always easy to find all of it. In order to understand where Halo 5 started, I had to play Spartan Ops, which was hidden in the Firefight menu in the Master Chief Collection instead of having its own tab or big in the Campaigns tab. Which it could be given how expansive it is. It took me about 10 hours to beat Spartan Ops compared to the 5.5 it took me to go through the main Halo 4 campaign. After that, I wanted to know more about Blue Team and so found the Fall of Reach movie on YouTube, but it's also available on some streaming services, I'm pretty sure. Then after that, I also had to watch Nightfall on YouTube, as while there is a tab for Nightfall in the Master Chief Collection, it just links out of the game to a dead webpage. So between Spartan Ops and basically 2 movies, I spent nearly 14 to 15 hours just experiencing the backstory needed to understand the next game. That is a big difference compared to the Bungie days, where one game led into the next and the next without any extra knowledge needed besides the previous games in the series. Something I liked about the trilogy is that Combat Evolved to Halo 2 to Halo 3 feels like one continuous story. Despite some issues here and there, it told its story in a pretty tidy fashion and didn't require too much extra from the player. Now the books still existed, and if you wanted more you can go read them, but you didn't need to know too much about them just to play the games. Just play them and you're fine. Now, however, yeah, I'm starting to see some of the cracks in the 343 era, and I had already complained about how they kept the Didact story mainly relegated to the terminals. But with all that out of the way, I think we're ready for Halo 5 at last. With all this homework I've had to do to prepare for it, here's hoping the game is worth it.